Star Trek Deep Space Nine started out as the black sheep of the franchise, only years later becoming one of the most beloved treks of all time. But what were some of the stories that didn't make it on screen? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information of any given topic in Star Trek. In this episode, we're continuing our look at some of the abandoned episode ideas for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, to better understand their place in Star Trek history. To be Ferengi was a story idea conjured up by none other than Armin Shimmerman, who of course played Quark on Deep Space Nine. Dealing with the prejudice faced by the Ferengi species, the episode would have seen an interesting though unsettling view of racism against the Ferengi. The story idea was rejected as it simply portrayed Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets in such a bad and dark light. And if you started pulling back the obvious racism, the entire story would suddenly lose its punch. Shimmerman really loved the story though, and together with David R. George III, they would turn it into the novel The 34th Rule. Another Ferengi story, this time written by Stephen DeKnight, Giant would delve deep into the Ferengi's backstory and history. Starting out in Quarks, we see Worf and Jadzia are out on the town for a date. Worf goes to grab the love of his life a drink at the bar, only to discover that upon his return to the table, that there's a Ferengi hitting on his girlfriend. Getting into a verbal argument, Worf says there's no honor in fighting a single Ferengi, and he hears a voice behind him saying, "I'd say the same thing about Klingons." And when Worf turns around, suddenly he's face to face with a giant Ferengi. After a huge brawl in the bar, all the parties are thrown into the brig so Odo can sort out the whole mess. As the story unfolds, the audience discovers that these two Ferengis are brothers, the regular Ferengi and the giant Ferengi. The big one is a scientist, and he discovers there's a secret to the Ferengi that they have been hiding for thousands of years. The Ferengi used to be big. They used to be like Klingons, and slowly they evolved into the lovable form we see in the 24th century. The entire story revolved around the message of don't underestimate someone based on their size. So, by utilizing genetic manipulation techniques, which were actually outlawed by the Ferengi government, the giant Ferengi was able to make himself, well, a giant again, far more fierce than even a Klingon warrior. Because they violated Ferengi law, Worf and Dax have to transport these two guys back to Ferenginar for trial. But on their way there, the Starfleet runabout gets attacked by a Jem'Hadar starship, and the runabout crash lands on a planet's surface, and Worf, Dax, and the Ferengi are forced to work together with one another to escape the planet and the Jem'Hadar. And by the time they do escape the planet, Worf has gained a new respect for the Ferengi, and lets the two convict Ferengis go, falsifying a report to Starfleet saying that the Ferengi fugitives were captured by the Jem'Hadar and that their status is currently unknown. Though a fun story, Giants really was a bit too far out there for the production staff's liking, being rejected for being far too ridiculous. Before joining the DS9 writing staff, the great Ronald D. Moore would pitch a fun and kooky idea, which was to be a sequel to the TOS episode A Piece of the Action. In the story, Sisko and our Deep Space Nine hero crew would be ordered to return to Sigma Iosha 2 to find out what happened to the planet, since over a century had passed since James T. Kirk's original mission there. Once at the planet, it would quickly be discovered that the Ioshians, a copycat people, would have recreated their entire society once again, creating a whole religion around the Federation. Basically, every Ioshian would be a satirized version of a Star Trek fan, right down to the cosplay. The powers that be of the series, though, were very uncomfortable with this idea. They felt that poking fun at fandom would not be doing DS9 any favors, as it was already seen as the black sheep of the Star Trek family, and with many fans having turned their back on it, believing it wasn't Roddenberry's vision. So making fun of the fans that did stick around for the show would be biting the hand that had fed them. The story wouldn't die there, though, as it would grow, be adapted, and severely changed, becoming the Star Trek Voyager episode, Virtuoso. Another Ronald D. Moore idea, Klingon Hell was originally planned as a storyline for Deep Space Nine's episode, Soldiers of the Empire. Instead of what we ultimately got there, fandom would have been treated to Worf and the crew of the Rotaran taking a trip to Grethor, Klingon Hell. The entire idea was rejected for one huge problem. Hell doesn't exist. And to say suddenly in Star Trek that Klingon Hell was real, that a starship could travel there, would have opened up a huge can of gawk that the showrunners did not want to open. Of course, this story idea would be reworked into an all-in-the-mind type episode for Star Trek Voyager titled Barge of the Dead. Lisa Klink would pitch this story idea to the powers that be for Deep Space Nine's 4th season. As laid out, Dr. Bashir would end up being captured and thrown into a work camp on an unexplored planet that had been occupied by an unknown alien species. Appalled by what he was witnessing, the camp under constant attack by brutal invaders, Bashir would agree to help the camp out, seeing himself as a type of hero that the Bajoran people could have used during the Cardassian occupation. But of course, all is not as it appears. In reality, it is the people in the camp who were the invaders, and the alien species are simply in the final stages of being expelled from their home world after decades of brutal occupation. It would have been Bashir's first-hand experience with the Prime Directive, and why it should always be adhered to. The powers that be did not like the story at all, as they couldn't see how a hero such as Bashir would turn his back on the Prime Directive and come out of the story as still a hero. It was dark and completely unbelievable. However, they did like the idea of Bashir being imprisoned by aliens, and so they would combine the idea with a story being written by Nicholas Voria, and the Deep Space Nine episode Hippocratic Oath would be born. Not to be confused with the Star Trek Voyager episode Persistence of Vision, this story was written by Robert Hewlett-Wolf for Deep Space Nine's 2nd season. The story would have seen Dax and O'Brien imprisoned in a virtual reality jail, and when they escape it, they suddenly realize that they hadn't actually escaped it and that they were still quite confined. They would end up escaping a bunch more times, only to realize each time that again they hadn't actually escaped, until the final time when apparently they do escape. The episode would have ended in O'Brien's quarters, with Keiko telling him how glad she was that he was back, and O'Brien simply staring at her saying, "I don't know whether I'm back or not. I'm never gonna know," and then fade to black. Michael Piller would axe the story as he felt it was far too dark, though Wolf would then go on to write the Season 2 episode Shadowplay, where he reused many of the story elements from Persistence of Vision, only making the episode a much, much lighter one. Deep Space Nine was definitely the more realistic Star Trek show. It tackled deep issues head-on, with a grace and a poise that was at the very core of what Star Trek truly was. A science fiction show designed to make you think, open your heart, and understand a different point of view. Deep Space Nine took Star Trek into the unknown, proving the human adventure was truly only beginning. Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrack. What do you think of these abandoned story ideas? Which ones would you have loved to have seen? Would you like me to create more videos about these lost tales? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel continue to bring these gems to life? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.